Good afternoon, everybody. This is Maria Barnes, and I'm the chapter president of Access Lunchtime. If you are on, if you would please mute your own microphone so you don't get background noise. Thank you. So I want to just introduce a couple of upcoming topics on our calendar and dates. Today we are having a guest speaker, Jim Detman, talking about understanding the Access Report Engine and some advanced techniques. And then we're going to take a break for June and July and have no webinars then. But we'll resume at the end of August, on August 27th. And we again are going to have a guest speaker talking about Access and SharePoint. That will be Robin Hunt, and she teaches Excel, Access, and databases. And then in September, on September 24th, we're going to have Mike Sullivan from the Access team speaking. I don't have his topic up yet. He hasn't decided on a topic, but we'll get that information up pretty soon here. So without further ado, I want to introduce Jim, and he can give you a little further rundown. But Jim and I have known each other for a couple years. He's a fellow Microsoft Access MVP and has been so for much longer than I have, since about 2010. And he's an independent consultant and is going to talk today about reporting. Go ahead and take it away, Jim.
Alrighty, hello everybody. Hope everybody's having a good day. Short, long weekend here in the U.S. for Memorial Day and a short work week, so hopefully it started off pretty good. A little bit about me. I've been developing software for the past 30 years. I've been using Access since version 1.1, and I've been answering questions online for the past 20 years. Started off way back on CompuServe, hang out on Experts Exchange right now, and I've been a Microsoft Access MVP since 2010, as Maria mentioned. A couple of housekeeping notes here real quick. As Maria said, we are recording. You will be muted, but feel free to unmute if you need something clarified, or you can ask it in the chat window. Maria will be keeping an eye on that for me. Please hold questions till the end, and I'll try to answer them time permitting. If you've got a question of how do I do this in a report, and not so much about the material that's being presented, hold those to the end, please, just so we can keep on track. I haven't actually timed this whole thing out, so I'm not sure we're going to end up on time. But, and of course, please feel free to contact me after this presentation, email, phone, or whatever, if you have questions that you didn't get answered or there's something here that you don't understand. I'll have my contact details up on the last slide. So who's this presentation for? We talked about it being advanced techniques. So we should be familiar with the basics of the Access Report Writer. Used to working with events and VBA code, and wants to really take things to the next level with their reports. But fear not, if what I just rattled off doesn't exactly describe you, stick around anyways, because at the very least you'll have a good idea of what the Access Report Writer can do, and you can pass that information along to somebody who maybe wants to get into the nitty-gritty a little deeper, but hang around in any case. Okay, and a quick note on the examples that I am presenting. What you see does not always represent best practices in all cases. I threw these demos together. The idea is to show you the technique, the reports themselves. You may see formatting issues. There's no error handling in the code. I'm using the Northwind database tables for some data. It's got things like special characters and field names and spaces and whatnot, and just a lot of things you probably shouldn't do. But the focus there is the technique. So with all that out of the way, I want to take a step back and just do a quick review of some of the report sections and properties because they tie into some of the techniques I'll be showing to you. First, the on-open of a report. You can do just about anything. You can change the record source, you can collect data, and I've got an example of that. We'll switch over to Access real quick, and we will show you a report that pops up a dialog, asks me for a date range, which way I want to see the report, and if I click OK, I get the report. That is all handled in the on-open event. So if I go into Design View, and we're looking at the report properties, and I go to Events, and I look at the on-open, you can see here that I am opening the form up, and a critical thing here is that I'm opening it in dialog mode. And what that does is suspends the program execution here in the report until that form is either hidden or closed. So it opens the form, it sits there and waits, collects the input, and then as soon as I click OK or cancel, it comes back and tries to make sure the form's loaded, checks what I did click. I just stick a yes in a hidden text field so that I can have a status indication of the user clicked or not. And then it starts doing things in the report. Based on the detail level I asked for, it starts to make certain groups visible, hide other groups, hide the detail, whatever you want to do. Sky's the limit right at this point. You can do anything you want in the report, including set a custom record source if you wanted to. And there's a bunch of different ways to do this, but the idea here is in the open report, you can do pretty much anything you want to the report. So let's see here. Let's jump back. And report header footers. Those are a good place to initialize variables or to close forms, various things you want to do inside the report. You might be doing totaling, so you would initialize the total variables up in the header and then use them on the report footer or possibly a group footer, whatever you're doing at that point. Detail event. Keep in mind that it fires once for each record. And if you're running an unbound report, that is a report with no record source, it fires once. So you might have a main report with a bunch of unrelated sub-reports, and it'll execute that detail section once unless you take other steps. Another place you might use an unbound report is if you were going to put the output of a crosstab query. Crosstabs are a difficult thing. We're not going to cover them today because it's a pretty complex subject, but they have a variable number of columns, so you can't handle it with the normal reporting tools you have available by default. And group headers and footers. One of the nice things about the group header is that it gives you the repeat section property, meaning it'll repeat itself at the top of each page. And that can become very handy, as you will see in just a minute. Page headers and footers. They work great when you have a main report, but when you have a sub-report, they are disabled. It's the main report's page headers and footers that count. And the problem with that is, what if your subreport spans more than a page? And let me show you that. So we'll close this. And I have this report here, which is a main and a subreport. And you can see we've got a nice blue band for the subreport headings. And if I go along, I see company C, company CC, and then I hit page 4 here and I've got no headings. The reason for that is because, like many people, we put the company headings in. Now, let me close that. Hang on one second. We put the headings in the report header of the subreport. And that's a problem because it only fires once. And if I go over more than one page, then it's a problem. So what do you do about that? Well, what you do is you stick in a group, a dummy group, and you set it to the expression equals 1, which means you get one group header at the beginning, and you could have a group footer if you wanted at the end. But the big thing with this group is that we set the repeat section value to yes. So it's going to pop up at the top of every page. So now when I run this report, and I come to company CC, first page is good, and now I have headings on the second page as well. So group headers can come in handy, and you just use that expression equals 1 to give yourself a dummy group. It's not tied to anything, and then you can do all sorts of things with it. All right. And let's see. Next thing up is on page. This is your last chance to do anything on the page. Typically you use this to draw lines, which we'll see when we get into the pre-printed forms. Couple report events that you should be aware of. On format is just before the report engine starts to lay everything down in the section on the page for formatting. On print is just before it's going to print the section. Okay, and the thing that most people get confused over is which section should they be using for their code. What you should be using is on format anytime you're going to change the layout of the report. You're going to move controls around, you're going to hide controls, you're going to make them visible. That all should be done in on format. Everything else should be done in on print. Okay. On retreat, this is something that a lot of people are not aware of or really don't understand. When you turn on certain things in the report engine, like a grouping levels keep together, the report engine has to work down the page. Let's say you have a group section that has keep with first detail. So it's working its way down the page, and it comes really close to the bottom of the page. It gets the group header in, but the detail, the first detail line, pushes off to the next page. Because of that setting you have with first detail, Access will work itself backwards, and it will retreat up the report. It will undo that first detail line, move to the previous page, undo the group header, and then it will page break and push everything down to the next page. That on retreat is what fires for each section that Access undoes. So if you're changing the layout in the on format or doing anything else, you need to undo that. And that includes totaling and everything else. So, and Dale just mentioned that some of the events depend on whether you're looking at report view or print preview or printing. I'm talking strictly about print preview here and printing the report. I'm really not talking about report view at all. Okay. Now, one of the things you may ask yourself is, how do I know that a retreat event has occurred? And you use onRetreat for that. And then when it comes back down the page, it's going to format a section again, and it's going to print a section again. It can also print a section twice because the section may split over a page boundary. So in the onFormat and onPrint, you'll notice that there's a couple things that are passed in, a couple variables. One's format count and print count, and the other is the option to cancel. And those tell you if this is the first time you're through that section, second time, third time, whatever it may be. And I can show you that in something a little later. So if you're doing totals, you'll want to put an if check around your totals that say, if print count equals 1, then add to my totals. If you don't do that, and you don't check which pass you're on, so to speak, you'll end up adding way too much to your totals. Okay, so with that all out of the way, have you ever wondered how the report engine gets the total number of pages on a report? Well, what it does is it runs the report twice. On the first pass, it executes everything but the onPrint event. It doesn't actually print. And then on the second pass, it executes your report normally. So how do you activate that? Well, what you do is on the main report, if there's a sub-report involved, it has to be on the main report, you place a control that references the pages property. Now that control can be hidden, but you must reference the pages property, and I'll show that to you in a second. How can you tell which pass you're on? Well, on the first pass through, if you look at the pages property, it will be equal to 0. And when you're on the second pass, it'll be page 1, page 2, or the pages will be filled in with the total pages, and you'll get the page count. Now, sub-reports will never have pages, page or pages, because the page event in there is not active. There's no page headers, there's no page footers, so there's no counting. Everything gets done on the main report. The good question, what can I use this for? All right, let's take a look at that. We'll give a couple different things that we can do. One of the common questions is, how can I number page 1 of 2, 2 of 2, 3 of 3 over a group, that type of thing. Let's take a look at this, and we'll go to print preview. And you can see down in the lower right-hand corner, the bottom number, page 1 of 16, is what the report engine is coming up with. Page 1 of 1 is my numbering that I've done internally. And if I continue through, I can see that the numbers, here's company CC, has 2 pages in the report, but we're on page 5 of 16. Now let's take a look at that and see how I did it. So I love this technique, by the way. This is the slickest way I have found it to do it. There is an old MSKB article from years ago. I don't think it's online anymore, but it had you writing the values to a table and all sorts of shenanigans. But this one uses an in-memory array. We keep track of the page and pages, and you just drop this code into a page footer section, and then the only thing you have to do is set a unique key that keeps track of the groups for each page. And walking through this code, if me.pages is 0, meaning we're on the first pass, then it redimensions the array, saves the page if it's the same, and it totals it up. So we get the totals per group. If it's not on the first pass, then it sets our control at the bottom of the form with the values from the arrays. So it works really well. What it looks like on the report is this. It's just an unbound control. And here is where I've referenced the pages property, and this control can be hidden. So that's a nice way of getting that. Now, page numbering is not the only thing you can do with this. You can also do Phonebook Style, where I can put the starting company and ending company at the top of each page. Okay. And if I click through this, you can see company D, F. So you can do Phonebook style things. You can do indexes. You can do table of contents. Just about anything. Anything you want to scan through the report on that first pass and store, and then save off. You can do Phonebook style is where the starting and ending entries of a page are shown up at the top. I could have taken the example further and done like left and right justification and columns and things like that. But the main point is you can store the values, stick them up in the header at the start of the page if you want, or stick them up anywhere on the page. Oh, yeah, Phonebook Modern. Yeah, you're right. What's a phone book? Now I gotcha. Oh, I didn't even think of that. Yeah, who uses a phone book anymore, right?
Hey,
Okay.
Jim, just a question. This is Dale.
Yeah.
So to do the phone book, that was my joke, by the way.
Yeah, I got it.
To do that phone book technique, do you actually have to use that retreat method? I've never used that method, so that's kind of slick.
Yeah, no. At the moment, we're talking strictly this two-pass method. So if I view the code for this,
Gotcha.
you can see in the page footer section, first pass through, I just grab the company that's on the page.
Gotcha.
And then on the second pass, I just, populate the last company. And of course, the first company is available, but I could have stored it in the array if I wanted to.
So you use that page header second pass to fill in that value that you recorded in the page footer first pass.
Right.
Okay, that's pretty slick.
So the first pass through, you're scanning through the report, pick up and store whatever you want. Second pass through, use whatever you stored in whatever place you need it. The whole thing, though, is the two passes.
Thanks.
Okay. So like I said, indexes, table of contents, continued on next page. If you want to put a message like that at the bottom, well, even if you're in a group, that you're on page 2 of 3, and it will continue on the next page. The report engine has will continue and has continued. They don't work. They refer to the sections, and they're wound a little too tight in terms of giving you information, and they don't work for what you would typically think of continued on next page or continued from previous page. But you can do that with this. All right, let's get on to some more interesting things. Oops. Okay. So now we're to the big kahuna. This is the one. This is the technique. Hopefully you guys are ready. Is that scary or what? It shouldn't be, because it boils down to 3 basic report properties. The first one is move layout. As the report engine is working it down the page, and what I mean by move layout is, so it starts up at the top of the page, left-hand column all the way at the top, so 0, 0. And let's say your page heading is 1 inch tall. Well, when it moves the layout after executing your page section, the coordinates will now be 1, 0. It's 1 inch down the page and still in the left-hand column. And every time it executes a section, that top property in the report keeps increasing until it gets to the bottom of the page. So this is moving the layout point section by section as it processes through the report. Then the other property is next record. So the report engine has done your page headings, printed your groups, done your first detail, and it's ready to do the next detail. This property tells it whether or not to read the next record. You can set it to true or false. Same for the move layout. And then the third one, the last one, is whether or not the section should be printed. So you can tell it to format a section, and then you can say, don't print it. And what you'll end up with is a blank line on the report. So between these 3 properties, in various combinations, you can do a lot of different things. All are set to true initially, and that's the normal report engine behavior. I always want to move down the page, I always want to move to the next record, and I always want to print the section. So let's take a look at how you might do some different things with these. So here's a report I set up. You remember at the start of the demo, I showed where opening a report popped up a form, collected some data. Well, this is the other way you can structure things, where the report won't run unless you open a form first. I generally like this technique because you may open different reports. You may want to do different types of outputs or different things, so I like to go the other way. So we're going to open the form first. And this says select a company. So we'll select a company. How many labels do we want to print? I want to print 10 labels, and I want to start at the 5th label down the page. So here's a report, our label report, mailing labels, and they're laid out 3 columns. And so 1, 2, 3, 4, we started on the 5th label. We skipped the first 4, and then we did the 10 labels after that. And if we take a look at this, how we did that, when the report opened, I grabbed the first couple of values off the form, the starting label and the number of labels to print, and I set a flag that says whether or not I hit the first label or not. And then in the detail print, I said, have we reached that first label yet? And if the answer is no, then we check to see if we've hit the starting label. And if we haven't hit it yet, I say don't print the section. In other words, leave a blank space. And don't move on to the next record. Remember, we selected only one company, so we don't want to move on to the next record because the report would terminate. You've only got one record driving this. If I did hit the starting label, I set my flag that I did, and I still don't want to move on to the next record. Next time we come through here, we're now on first label true, and now I want to find out if we've hit the end. So as long as we haven't hit the number of labels yet, I want to keep saying that next record is false. Now, like I told you, by default, maybe I didn't say it clearly enough, every time you hit a section, these are all set to true. So I keep pushing it to false, and as soon as I don't do that, next record is true, goes to do the next details section, and there's no next record, and that's the end of generating the report. So there's a lot of different things you can do with this. You can use it to skip rows. Let's look at another example here. Let me close this one. And just to show you real quick, if I said starting label 9, it would just push it further down the page. Okay, works no matter what we do. Let's see, let's look at another report, customer listing. Here I've told it every 6th line I want a line break. Okay, and if we look at the code for this, straightforward enough. I keep a line break count. I keep a counter, and every time I hit the increment, I say don't move to the next record because I want to print the record I'm on the very next line. I tell it not to print the detail section, and I tell it to go ahead and move the layout down the page. So combinations of these, you can do all sorts of things. And this is the real control over the report engine. This allows you to do all sorts of things, a couple of which we just went through. Okay. One of the other things you can do too is you can push a group footer down the page if you want that way. You can use the me.top property to tell where you are on the page. And then you can set up a condition where you say, if I'm not at 6 inches down the page, then keep moving the layout, don't print the section, and don't move to the next record. And it'll keep incrementing down the page. And then you can, at some point, say, okay, now you can print the group footer. So lots of different things you can do with that. And I'll show you something else we can do with it. Let's take a look at the next thing. Oops. Let's take a look at pre-printed forms. This is one that always gives everybody headaches. You can do pre-printed forms in 2 ways. You can literally draw the form line by line, or you can use an image and underlay the report. And here we're going to use move layout again. So let's take a look at drawing some lines on the report, what that looks like. Get back to Access, and we'll take a look at Report Pack. So here you see some border around the page. You see some vertical lines that go through. A lot of people try to put vertical lines in each section, and you end up with gaps and whatnot. But with this, what I did is I used the on-page event. Remember, that's the last event that fires just before a page is printed. And what I did in there is I drew the lines using the line method. And most of the time in reports, you're working in TWIPs, which is 1/1200th point for a font. It's just a scaling factor. You can change the scale mode to inches or whatever you want to work with. But you work in one scaling factor. And what I did here is a little unique. I took some hidden controls, and they're right here, and I just named it and I've got one for each column. And the reason I did that is because in the code then, I can say use the left and left property for that control along with this top value for the start of my line, and then the left property again and the end. And I picked up the start and the end by looking at this horizontal line I have, and then I put another horizontal line at the bottom. The reason I did all that is because I can work with these lines graphically, the controls and whatnot, and I don't have to worry about the code. I don't have to worry about measuring anything. All I have to do is move these controls around. Like if I want this column wider, I just pull this control over, and when I go to print preview, that column is now moved over. And if I don't like where it is, I can just push it back, and I'll put it in the middle there. Do print preview, and now the columns move. So it makes it very easy to maintain the reports because I can work graphically rather than trying to place something and figure out where it is in twips or inches or whatever it may be. So you can build up a pre-printed report like this. That's one way to do it. You can draw all the lines. You can use the code align method to draw it. This is what drew the border around the whole page, by the way. Very easy to do, straightforward. And that's one way to handle pre-printed forms. A really slick way and a really nice method of handling pre-printed forms. And I'll show you this one, and you're going to love this one. This is a VIX bill of lading. It's an industry standard. To draw this would take forever. This report, though, actually what it is an image that I have behind all the other controls. Okay? I just load the image behind. And then I have unbound controls on top of everything because this was an exceedingly complex report. These two sections here only take 7 entries, and if you overflow more than 7 entries, then you have to do additional pages, and the additional pages look totally different. And so the first page is totally unbound, and this page always exists, but I can have any number of the supplement pages for either section. If there were 100 POs on a shipment, I might need 2 or 3 pages for the customer order number section, or I might need only 1 page for the carrier. So the way I designed this was I do this as the first report. I pass the page number to whatever pages I need. So I've actually got one document made up of 3 different reports. And I pass the page numbers so they're all numbered consecutively and so on. But the real thing here is this drawing of this image and underlaying it. And notice that I'm in the page header. All right? And if we look at the on format, there's a lot of code here, okay, that populates everything. I left the code in. It doesn't work. I don't have the data source. This came from a client system. But I wanted you to see how you could build something on the fly, totally unbound. The other pages, though, they work a little differently. They use, again, they're in the page header, but here, what I used is that move layout equals false. What I did is I underlaid the page again with an image, but by saying no to that move layout, it stays in the upper left corner. And if we scroll down, I use the dummy group header technique to soak up some space to account for these headings up at the top and get me to the first line. And then I've got a normal detail section that fits all these lines one by one, and I let the report engine do its thing. So I executed the page header. I told it not to move the layout, so it sits on the upper left corner. I have that dummy group header to take up some space, and then it starts laying the lines down one by one. Normal report engine behavior. So you can do really complex things when you start combining these different techniques. All right. The carrier information is the same type of deal, just a few different fields, but it's the exact same thing. One more thing you can do with this. Let me close these, and you'll love this one. So we have, let's take a look at this one. This is a packing slip for Staples.com. If you're a vendor with Staples.com and you ship orders in their name, you have to generate a packing slip like this. And the neat part about this is we've got a rail on the right-hand side that extends pretty much the top to the bottom of the page. Probably should have showed you the Home Depot. Their packing slip is incredibly complex. But again, we use this move layout false. I set up a page header. It's got the logo and it's got the right rail. Okay? And I did move layout equals false, so the print stays up in the top. And then I have a detail section. It's got the headings, and I laid in a sub-report, and then did a page footer. And the end result, my sub-report does all the line items, and the main report, page header, does the logo and the right rail, and then I've got some headings. So you can do quite a bit between those three report properties, and that's what really lets you control the report engine. All right, let's talk about just a couple more things. What happens when thing goes wrong with your report? You're doing all this fancy stuff, you're turning properties on and off, using code, and it don't work. My advice is go back to square one. Come out all your code, turn off all the access features like group keep togethers, because the more you try and control things, the more problems you're going to have. That's true of forms, by the way, as well, and access in general, because so much is built in. But with reports especially, you generally design a report, you might come back to it a few years later and somebody says, oh, we need this tweaked, and you turn on one more setting and the whole thing doesn't work. Well, more often than not, you're shooting yourself in the foot. You're trying to use two settings that are not really compatible, and you end up with blank pages or lines and spaces where you don't expect. So, as Einstein says there, you can't solve the problem if you keep thinking the same way. So you got to undo everything and then start over, do settings one by one, work back to what you want to get out of it. All right? So to recap the techniques, you use the on open to control the report. That's where you can do anything you want. Use dummy group bys to get an additional header footer group and get that repeat section property. Use the two-pass mode when you want to scan through the report on the first pass, and then on the second pass, react to that data you saved wherever you pulled it off of. Control the report engine using move layout, next record, and print section. And then you can handle pre-printed forms by drawing lines or using an image. Okay, and if you use the image, you put it in the page header, move layout equals false, and then work your way down the page. With that, we have exactly 10 minutes for questions. I haven't been watching the chat window too much, so if you want to ask a question, unmute and fire away, or type it in the chat window.
I didn't see any real questions come up other than one that I posted, which was you mentioned something about moving down the page before you put the footer of a layout group, rather. Is that the best way to get footers to align at the bottom of the page? I know I've had totals and such happen at the end of the group because there's keep group together set, and I really want them to appear closer to the bottom of the page. Is that the best way to do something like that?
I found it to be the best way. There were three different techniques to get a group footer at the bottom of the page. And the one I like the best is move layout equals true, next record equals false, and print section equals true. And you just keep repeating that until you work your way down to the page. Where that doesn't work well is when you have a very tall detail section. And in that case, I generally shrink all the controls and I move them, and I let the detail section shrink down, and so I get a small, like 1/4 inch detail section, and then I just keep working my way down the page. Anybody else?
Yeah, other specific questions, anyone?
I know that it's kind of overwhelming at first. There was quite a bit of material here in terms of concept, but that recap page was, kind of summed it all up. I did not show conditional page breaks. It's probably one technique I should have gotten to, but that is where you have a page break in the detail section and say you want 20 lines per page. Again, you just count, and then on the 20th or 21st, you activate the page break by making it visible, and the report engine bumps it onto the next page for you. So that's something I didn't mention. And crosstabs. I mean, crosstabs could be a whole presentation unto itself with all the things you got to do for that. But it's kind of along the lines of that VIX bill of lading, where you have to do everything unbound. You have to poke the data into all the controls. So, determine number of columns, which fields they're tied to. It gets pretty involved, but it is doable. It is doable.
Well, the other thing that I don't think you specifically mentioned, but you alluded to by one of your forms at the beginning, where you had a form and it maybe changed some settings in the group header before it actually displayed the report. I love to use those kind of techniques because, you could make 12 copies of a report, each grouped differently or sorted differently or whatever you wanted to do. But then suppose you want to add a column. Then you have to add it to 12 places, or you forget and you add it to one, not some of the others. So maintaining things is much easier.
Excellent point. The more flexible you can make things, you can do it all in one report, and then you're not maintaining 12 different reports. So yeah, that and I could show that real quick. Let me get back here. So that was say no. I got to remember which one I did here. Customer orders. No, it wasn't that one. Which one was it? Customer labels, customer listening. Shipped. That's the one. Yeah, so here I'm asking level of detail, and instead of doing two different reports, I could do summary or detail, and I'm changing the layout of the report by turning the group header on and off and hiding a couple controls and making them visible and that type of thing. So yeah, definitely works. All right, if there is nothing else, thanks for taking the time out of your day to attend. Thanks to IT Impact, who created these virtual user groups and made the presentations possible. Thanks to Maria for keeping tabs on the chat for me. I'm guessing the recording will be available sometime in a couple of weeks or so, thereabouts.
It usually takes a little less than a week.
Okay. And like I said earlier, feel free to email with any questions you might have. I know there was a lot here. Some of it's pretty confusing. I went through quite a bit pretty quickly, so my email address is up there, and I'm sure if you have any ideas on what you'd like to see in future presentations, Maria would love to hear from you.
Definitely. Trying to get next fall organized. So this is a great time to come up with ideas for future presentations. So Jim, you mentioned that you might put some of the resources, the slide deck and or some of the code available afterwards.
Yeah, I'll give you the sample database I did here. Just everybody needs to keep in mind that it's not best practices in all cases. And I'll put a little note into that effect in there because it's some of them I just put together based on the Northwind data. So
yeah, and what I'll do is under the AccessUserGroups.org/lunch, there is a blog area. You're probably used to going to events and that kind of thing to click on the meeting links, but there's a blog section or a tab, and I'll put a new blog entry in with links to whatever resources Jim makes available to us. So watch for that. I'll get that up in the next couple days or as soon as he gets them to me. That won't take quite as long as the video because it doesn't have to be edited.
Okay, well, if there's nothing else, thank you, everyone.
Yeah, we got a lot of positive comments here, and I thought it was just terrific, Jim. Thank you so much for all the informative information. I'm sure we're going to now take this info away and play with the reports we've been struggling with and get some good ideas going forward here.
All right. Well, enjoy the rest of the short week, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.